Welcome back into Yellowhammer Radio right here on Superstation 101 WYDE. I am Scott Chambers.
And I'm Andrea Tice, welcoming in Jeff Roberts, who's going to be talking to us today. We're glad he's here. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Jeff Roberts is with us, and we're so glad to have Jeff joining us here today on Superstation 101 WYDE on Yellowhammer Radio. Jeff Roberts is the founder of Jeff Roberts and Associates. His team consists of 7 seasoned advisors who share 125 years of financial planning with Ameriprise. Barron's Magazine has placed them among the top 1,200 financial advising practices in the country 6 times. Jeff's a local guy who's doing some big things, and we're happy to have him with us today. Good afternoon, Jeff Roberts. How are you, sir?
Andrea, Scott, I'm very well. How about you?
Fantastic, man.
Doing great.
What is on your mind today, Jeff Roberts?
Well, today, as you all recall, I like to talk about things that I see and experience with clients from week to week. And so a lot of our themes and conversations are things that I'm taking away from client meetings. And this week we're going to talk a little bit about long-term care. It's a common concern or planning issue that we address with clients, both in retirement and before retirement. And so I wanted to hit on some of the big picture concepts that people need to be thinking about. So here's some big pictures. First, of course, you kind of have to ask the question, well, what exactly is long-term care?
I was just about to ask that. What is long-term care, Jeff Roberts?
Well, it's basically a range of services and supports that you may need to meet your personal care needs, oftentimes in retirement. For example, most commonly it's when somebody is retired, no longer working, and they have a need for medical assistance. They could be disabled for a period of time. And most long-term care is not necessarily medical care. It's rather assistance with the basic personal tasks of everyday life. Sometimes they're called activities of daily living, such as bathing, dressing, using the toilet, transferring from a bed to a chair, caring for incontinence, or eating. And those daily living activities, if someone gets to the point where they need help with those, that's when long-term care can kick in, or the need for long-term care kicks in. And we see that most commonly with people in retirement. So that's kind of what long-term care is.
So it has primarily, am I reading this right, is just primarily medical issues to plan for?
Yeah, well, what it usually is, it's an issue of a medical condition that causes someone to not be able to function independently or on their own.
Okay.
And that's where the rubber hits the road. For you have skilled care, which is basically if you're injured and you're going to recover from it, you receive skilled care. But custodial care is typically something like what I'm describing, where you need care with daily living activities that you simply cannot do on your own. And so what happens is when you need care of that type, there are different places or resources you can go, and I'll generalize them. For example, you can have care that you receive in your home.
Okay.
So, for example, I'll use my grandmother, who's now passed away, but before she passed, we had in-home care provided for her, where we wanted to keep her in the home as long as possible, and so that was her familiar surroundings. And so we provided assistance where people could come in and help her with those daily living activities. Then sometimes it gets to the point where that can become too expensive, or more round-the-clock care is needed, and
Yes.
sometimes you have to consider something called an assisted living facility, which is residential care setting that combines housing as well as support services and care for oftentimes elderly individuals. And when you're looking at things like assisted living, one important part of that might be making sure that a facility has memory care services, which is what is provided to people oftentimes with Alzheimer's and memory conditions. And not all assisted living facilities provide memory care services. And then there's kind of the third option is a nursing home, which is a place of residence for people who require constant nursing care with significant deficiencies with daily living activities. And so that's kind of the most extreme scenario. And there are now examples of things called continuing care retirement communities, which can be a living community that combines all of those services into one, where you can matriculate from one type of service to the other, all within a certain type campus. So that's what long-term care is, and then those are the facilities that are available to provide that, or the ways that you can receive that care. But then a big question, too, comes, what are the costs?
And the first steps in engaging in that and planning it, correct?
Correct. And so, for example, and these numbers that I'm giving come from a couple of different sources. The most common for these sources is the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and they've got a website called longtermcare.gov that provides some really great resources. And some of the numbers that we've seen show home care costing in Alabama somewhere in the neighborhood of $40,000 a year, around
Ouch.
17, and that's per person. So if you have a husband and a wife, and they're both, say, living at home, and they have a household income, well, one of those people is going to need $40,000 a year just for their care, and that doesn't include prescriptions and medications. So that's about $17 an hour is the rate, but it oftentimes goes more than just Monday through Fridays. It can go into weekends or continue into the evening. Assisted living facilities are about the same price we see on average, around $40,000-ish a year, roughly. Nursing home facilities in Alabama average more like $68,000 a year is kind of an average number that we see per person. And we generally see those costs are increasing each year, somewhere between, the statistics show, around 5 to 6% per year. Those costs go up. So they're increasing typically much faster than inflation is. So somebody's costs can really be impactful on particularly a couple. So those are kind of the stats as far as the costs are concerned. Then the question becomes, well, what's the likelihood that I'm going to need this? And this is what's interesting to hear, that the duration and level of long-term care will vary from person to person, obviously.
Right.
And they often change over time. So what I'm about to share with you is kind of the on-average numbers, and again, from Department of Health and Human Services. Someone turning 65 today has almost a 70% chance of needing some type of long-term care services and supports in the remaining years.
So one of those three options that you presented is just, you said 70% chance.
Just almost 70%,
Wow.
just shy of 70. And then women typically on average need it for a span of 3.7 years on average. And the Department of Health and Human Services showed that men need it for only about 2.2 years on average. So women need the care longer than men. And this is an interesting one. One third of today's individuals 65 years of age may never need care in their life. So if say about just short of 70 do need care, well, then a third don't need care. But remember, 20% of those at 65 years of age will need it for more than 5 years on average as well. So to summarize, basically, about 70% need care. Women need it for about 3.7 years on average, men for 2.2, but about 20% of the individuals over 65 are going to need it for as much as 5 years, which is a long period of time. And when you do the math, you can see it can be substantial. And so, but I kind of describe it when we're talking to clients. They talk about, well, what's the percentage chance that I'm going to need it? I say, well, it's for you personally, it's 0 or 100.
Right.
You either need it or you don't.
Mm-hmm.
And so the analogy that I use is, think about it like this. What's the likelihood if you take somebody that's like 50 years of age driving a car, and you take a 16-year-old boy driving a car, if you look at the insurance rates on those guys, there's a huge difference between a 50-year-old male, say, and a 16-year-old male driving a car, because the likelihood of a 16-year-old being in a wreck, as we know, is much greater, right?
Yes.
Of course.
Yeah.
the cost of that 16-year-old's insurance is going to be a lot higher because the likelihood of a car crash, we all know, is higher. Well, long-term care is kind of the same way. So we can talk now about solutions, but before I do, I want to give a quick example. So if you've got somebody that's got $1 million, hypothetically. Now, you may remember back in October we did a workshop we were talking on retirement planning, and I used a scenario that said people in retirement should try and carve off no more than 3% of their nest egg to live off of. So if you got $1 million, you're safely going to carve off, say, $30,000 a year. Well, you can see how quickly that'll get spent very quickly with long-term care facilities. It goes super fast.
Right.
So what people can do is they have two options. You can self-insure, which means you assume all the risks. I'm going to save as much money as I can. I'm going to have a big old nest egg, and I'm going to hope that I have enough in my nest egg, my war chest of money to be able to cover all the costs that I'm going to need for myself and or my spouse in our lifetime.
That sounds like a big hope, though.
It can be risky, and it's going to be a bunch of money. The next one is you can transfer the risk to an insurance company, and that's where a lot of the questions just begin when people say, yeah, because you get long-term care insurance, and I'm telling you, I have more people come in with these preconceived ideas of what it is and how it works and what it costs and all this sort of thing. And there's different types. There's traditional long-term care insurance where you pay a premium and you get a benefit in your lifetime for a defined period contractually. And now there's policies where there's a life insurance policy that has not only a death benefit, but it can have a living benefit that provides long-term care dollars to use for long-term care in addition to life insurance. So there's all these different hybrids and things. And my statement to people is this. If you're concerned about long-term care and you have preconceived ideas of what it costs, or you've heard someone say how these policies, they don't pay, or they do pay, or they're too expensive, my comment to anyone is sit down with an advisor to walk you through your unique options and the products and services that may be available to you to customize something. Because to ignore long-term care overall is literally burying your head in the sand and like looking at a 16-year-old boy and saying, you don't need auto insurance. Because the statistics show that there's a much greater likelihood that someone needs long-term care than a 16-year-old is going to be in a wreck. And we know how likely that is going to be, right?
Exactly.
All kids bump and dink their cars. So
yes.
The message is seek help, ask questions, and get somebody to have a conversation unique to you about options and services in long-term care. Very important.
Very, very phenomenal here, because I had a relative who needed long-term care following a stroke, and I know what it can be like and the stress and struggle it puts on families. So definitely. It's
tremendous. And if you have a family member in another state where the cost of living is much higher, like New York, those numbers I gave you could be literally double.
Wow.
It's unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Well, Jeff, if people want to find out more, they should definitely talk with you. You would be a great start.
We'd love to help. We deal with long-term care protection strategies all the time, and feel free to give us a buzz at 313-9150 or look us up online, jeffrobertsandassociates.com.
All right, Jeff. Well, it's a pleasure as always talking to you each and every Wednesday. We look forward to our chat next week where you can fill us in on some more information and help us out financially for the long term.
Thanks, guys.
All right, Jeff Roberts and Associates right here on Yellowhammer Radio.
This is Yellowhammer Radio.